Cowork projects just dropped and it changes everything for non-technical users. In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of how to use it as an AI operating system, from running your content journey to automating your sales and all those boring business operations in between. So let's get into it. Okay, so here we are in my Claude desktop app, and you'll notice on the left, we have the shiny new projects folder over here. So the way that I like to think about projects are just isolated workspaces. If you look at any business out there, they're going to have specific departments and functions in them, obviously. But at a higher level, you can think of a business as having the need to acquire new customers. They need to have something that they deliver to these customers, either a service or a product. And then they need to be able to support these customers. And they usually do that with some kind of back-end operations. So with projects, we can split that out by function. So we can have our delivery operating system here, which has all of our skills and plugins specifically related to delivering our product or service to that client. Same thing for GTM. Now, GTM is just a term that basically says we're going to make a really good looking offer, find a whole bunch of people to put it in front of, and then hopefully close them. That's really the entire process of going to market. And then obviously for support and operations, we would have a workspace as well down here that deals with all of the back-end stuff that people don't really focus on, but also perhaps some of the documentation and things like that that we need to give to these people as part of delivering a service or doing our GTM, such as proposals, statements of work, things like that. And then content generally is one of the ways that we would serve all of these people. The point is we are using these folder spaces to logically isolate specific parts of our business. And as a consultant, this is extremely handy for me because if you've seen this channel, I've been talking about the AI operating system for a few months now. Generally, I work in my IDE, and this tends to scare a lot of non-technical people because they just see this box over here and all of this stuff, and they think it's complicated. So Anthropic obviously acknowledge this. So they built Cowork as a user-friendly way of doing most of the things that we can do in the back end, but realistically, I still prefer working in an IDE. The point is though, with this logical isolation, it helps us understand things a lot better, but it also has a lot of added functionality that we're going to look into now. So let's just start with the GTM operating system because that's probably the easiest concept to understand. So when I talk about an operating system here, what I'm talking about is a list of skills that are bundled together to serve this specific business need or department. In this case, it's going to market, which is taking that offer, putting it in front of the right people and closing those people on a call. And as part of that, I have several skills. Skills generally, if we're trying to distribute them, we're going to push them as plugins because it's a really good way to bundle everything up and then push it into a system like this. So you can see over here, I've got my atomicOps GTM. I've split up my plugins just like I have my project folders. And you can see over here, I have all of the skills that would form the going to market plugin. So everything that I'm ever going to need to go to market is written down in a skill that AI can take care of for me. And just as a side note, any plugins that I do talk about in this video, I have deep dives on my channel into how I built them, and I generally give them away for free. So I'm not going to be focusing too much on what all of these things actually are and how they work. You can watch the deep dive if you're interested in that. I want to stick to what projects is and how we would be using it for this specific video. But as a part of that, I obviously need to give you an example. So as part of going to market, I want to go and research all of my leads. And this specific skill that we have over here called Research Lead, it's going to go out there and it's going to do hyper-relevant outreach for us. So it starts with a LinkedIn profile and it researches all the way through using several systems until it gets to a point where it's in a database for me to approve. Once it does that, it will go to HeyReach and it will automatically form part of a campaign that brings me leads on demand. So as a part of that, I wouldn't want to have to go and do all of this stuff manually because coming in here and going research lead, why would I want to do that? I would much rather schedule tasks. We can do that over here. Now, for the past few weeks, it has been available in Cowork as a whole. But again, this logical separation just helps us as humans organize our working life. Me as a consultant or a solopreneur, I understand that, okay, this folder space over here is exactly for everything that I need for going to market. So I'm going to schedule my tasks for researching my lead over here. And I would just simply come down here and I would say sales research. And I could set a frequency. I want this to run every day. I want it to run at 7 in the morning. And I can run it on a different model if I want to. So for this, I would probably leave Opus because it's a really long research lead workflow. But for smaller tasks, you might want to use one of these models down here. And then all I would have to do is hit save. And we can now see that it's a part of my GTM OS that every morning at 7 o'clock, this thing is going to run and research all of my leads for me and put them in front of me for my approval. And at this point, I'm sure some of you might be wondering what the hell is a skill or a plugin. So we're going to have a brief look at that over here. I've gone over to the Customize tab and you can see we have my personal plugins loaded. We clicked on the GTM plugin over here and you can see all of my skills. So a skill is literally just like a standard operating procedure. Imagine you handed a playbook to one of your employees And this thing told them exactly what to do step by step in order to do the job that they were paid to do this morning. That's exactly what a skill is. We are just telling Claude what to do for this specific thing. So if we come on over to the research lead thing that we just scheduled, you'll see over here, the goal is take leads from Apollo, enrich with LinkedIn and Perplexity research, and generate signal-built outreach that passes one test. Could this message only have been sent by this one person? Because for this whole thing, I'm focusing on relevance. I think personalization is dead, and relevance is the only thing that ever mattered anyway. So this skill kind of focuses on that. More importantly, though, you can see how simple this is. It is in plain English. And like I said, if you had to hand this to a human and you were paying them money, they would understand exactly what to do. It just outlines the system flow. It tells you what tools this system is going to be using in order to achieve its goal. In this case, we're using several MCP servers. We're using a bunch of scripts down here. We have a bunch of references of what my writing might look like, what a good post looks like when I'm reaching out to people. All of those things live inside our skill because it helps AI be a lot smarter at doing whatever it needs to do. And as you can see, in your business, you're going to have tons of different skills to help you do different things within your business. So as a human, and perhaps even as a system, it makes logical sense for us to group these things, which is why we have this concept of an operating system. Because if I want a GTM workspace, I want to make sure that all of my stuff lives in that workspace. And the easiest way to group all of these skills is to bundle them into something called a plugin, so that I can distribute them into my own GTM operating system. I share it with my community that way. You can even use this to go and sell it to businesses as part of a tailor-made AI operating system for them, which is part of the model that I talk about a lot on this channel if you've seen any of my other videos. Then obviously it's not just about GTM. We need to fill up our other project spaces or departments within our business. So we have skills for content. Here we have AI news monitors, AI SEO that tracks what YouTube is currently trending, competitor analysis to see what people in the space are talking about so we can find contrarian approaches. And then as part of this, it turns it all into an automated YouTube pipeline that just writes me scripts, generates me thumbnails, all of that stuff on demand. That all lives inside our content OS, runs on autopilot on a scheduled task. We do the same thing for our backend ops. We can build things like daily briefs. So instead of checking our emails, reading this place, reading that place, we can get all our news delivered to Telegram, or even now with Dispatch, this is literally your phone linking to Cowork, we can get it all sent to us so that we have to do far less manual work. That is the whole point of all of this. And this is how I am currently building my entire AI operating system. So that at a very high level is just how these things work. And I'm going to flip on back into our GTM OS over here. And we're going to talk about the next most important thing, which is context. Now, context is something that has existed in Claude for a while. Specifically with this, we're literally giving it a folder workspace over here on my computer. Much like I would when I come on over to VS Code over here, you'll notice that I have this context folder. And inside this context folder is all the context that I need for my business. The way that I write, the way that I speak, everything to do about my personal journey over the last 12 years, it lives in here. So every time I either talk to Claude or run any of the skills that you've now seen, it has all of this information that it needs. And it can just pull that out of there whenever it needs it. So we now have that living right here inside Cowork for us. But more specifically, it's inside our project folder, which just helps this specific project achieve its goals a lot better because context makes everything when we are working with AI. Then next up, and this is really handy, we now have memory in Cowork. So specifically for each of these project folders, it has isolated memory for this and it remembers things across sessions. So if I talk to it one day today and I say a bunch of things, anything it thinks that it's important, it will commit to memory, or you can specifically ask it to do that. But more importantly, next time you have a conversation with it, it will remember that important thing and bring it into the context window that you are now working with. So previously you had to use a plugin or a skill to help you do this. And to some extent, you might still want to use one of those because we've built some pretty crazy memory systems on this channel where we stash things in RAG and we have a whole bunch of temporal decay and other fancy things that help us have really intelligent memory systems. But for most businesses, they really don't need that. They just needed something that helps make Claude a little bit more context aware compared to starting a new session every single time they open up Claude. But then last but not least, we have instructions. And these again are for project level instructions over here. So this is kind of like your Claude.md for this specific workspace. And it just gives it a few rules that we might want to use for this workspace. So instead of doing things like adding tone or formatting, which to me I would stash in my context over here, or within the skill when I give it an example of what good writing or good tone looks like, I would focus on rules, specifically how to guide the way that this thing works. So I might just give it some very basic context saying you're a GTM operating system and you're helping this business achieve this thing. Something simple like that. This doesn't need to be complex. Oftentimes, having a massive claude.md file or giving it a lot of instructions when it doesn't really need them can just confuse the system. So you need to think about that before you're adding instructions where you don't need them, especially now that we have context in here and most of our instructions live inside our skill where we have that exact operating manual that we need. So creating projects is extremely simple. All you have to do is click on this plus sign over here. Then you can either start one from scratch, you can import a project from a previous chat that you had, or you can use an existing folder that you might have lurking around here somewhere. But for me, like I showed you over here, this is how I planned it. I didn't just come in here and kind of YOLO my way through it. I've logically broken down aspects of my business, and I've been doing this for a few months now, working in the back-end version of Claude, because I think it makes the most sense to do it this way. Even if you're in a larger organization and you have a sales and marketing department, they would have a project folder, but inside there, they would have separate things that help them achieve their goal as a sales and marketing department. It would be up to you as a business or the consultant coming in and installing this for a business to understand how they would want to break things down logically. But for the most part, I think what I've got here does a pretty good job at that. So I think it definitely comes down to proper planning because you want to make sure that you get this thing right. Once you have logically isolated it, building the specific skills that you need is easier than it's ever been because you can just talk to Claude and say, hey, I'm trying to build this aspect of my business. What do I need? There are some limitations that we need to talk about though, because while this is getting to where it needs to go, the backend version is still far superior. I have a lot more control, functionality, and I have a lot more freedom despite some people thinking that it's a little bit intimidating. Some of the things that you need to think about here are when we have all of our skills, they need to be able to go out there into the real world and do a lot of actions on our behalf. That's how this whole automation thing works. And right now, there are a few limitations with the MCP connectors inside Cowork. So we have a whole bunch of the main applications that people use every day, and that's great. But then we can also add custom ones. So if we don't have something over here when we're browsing our connectors, you do have the opportunity to come over here and just add a custom connector. But that custom connector that you want to add, they need to have a remote MCP server set up for you so that you can just put in the URL and connect. Now, thankfully for things like HeyReach and Firecrawl, I've been able to do that. You can see here, these are two custom ones that I set up earlier. But we're limited here in what we can actually do if this functionality doesn't exist. In my IDE, if I don't have an MCP server, I can literally build one like that and run it on the spot. With this, I can't do that because the way that Cowork actually works, it creates an isolated virtual machine on your computer and it locks you behind that so you don't have full access to do whatever you want. They do that to protect you from prompt injection and a few other things that don't really matter to you right now. But the point here is that you're supposed to be able to override this to some degree in the capabilities over here. If you look down here, you can see we have a domain allow list. This would give us a little bit of network access to go and maybe set something up locally and then use that to kind of proxy our way through to a specific tool that we need to use. But right now there's a massive bug where no one is actually able to do this because this whitelisting isn't actually working. But I digress. The whole point of me saying that is that if a tool does not exist in MCP, you're not going to be able to run a specific workflow that you might have built in your IDE version back here. It's probably not going to work in here. So that's one of the biggest issues at the moment. I imagine they're going to fix that very soon though. So I think the play here is really simple for building an AI operating system. You need to look at your business, and to be honest, it's mostly going to look like this because most businesses have these functions. You need to sell something, that's why you're in business. You need to get in front of those people, which is why you have go-to-market. You're probably going to get that done with content at the moment. That's a very popular way of doing this as a part of direct lead gen. So you're going to have your inbound and your outbound. And then you obviously have all the operations and the boring stuff on the back end. You're going to automate as much of this stuff as you can. So you're going to set up scheduled tasks for your skills or your playbooks that go through these things, and the agent does all of the work for you. And then you're going to work alongside it by talking in here, and this thing will pop up in some chats for the stuff that you cannot entirely automate. And you can do that. So while this thing is running, I can pop over to my GTM OS and I can work in here for a little bit, come back when this chat is done and carry on working in here, while these things are also autonomously running on their scheduled tasks. So the goal of our AI operating system is to do all of the work that slows us down growing in a business. So you as a solopreneur or a consultant, if your goal is to make money, you obviously need to be focusing on areas where your time personally has the most amount of leverage on making that money. And the machine takes care of everything else. That is the point of this operating system. And so understanding this structure is the most important, because once we've nailed this part, all we need to do are build a specific list of skills to get each one of these things done. For delivery, I need this specific list. For GTM, I need this specific list. And you can see we've broken that down here. If I come and have a look at my delivery OS, we just go to plugins. Say you're a consultant and part of what you do is either audits or you build prototypes. You can see here we have a build app skill. So this is something where I would need to manually come in here. So while all of my other stuff is working in the background, I can come and build my prototypes inside Cowork using this specific skill. Then I would flip over to my GTM and I would use other skills while some of the skills are running on their native schedules. And that to me is how we work in the system, and it's only going to get better, specifically in Cowork. For now, I'm definitely still sticking to my IDE because, like I said, there is far more functionality inside here. I can get away with doing a lot more, a lot easier, because I have complete control and complete freedom. So this was just a very quick video to give you an overview of projects as a whole. I have a ton of deep dives into all of these things that I just spoke about here, so you can check those in the description below. Otherwise, leave some comments and let's talk about this more. I will get back to you as soon as possible. If you need some help or want this type of thing set up for you, you can also get in touch with me or check out my community. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.